Hello, this is Sagar Kamath, and welcome to the first podcast for Lifespring. And joining me is my co host Vishaka Tripathi.
Hello. We decided to do this podcast owing to the overwhelming response that we have had ever since we launched LifeSpring. Even at the start, we made it quite clear LifeSpring was going to be a unique mentorship program where we would be mentoring youth on various aspects ranging from career guidance to stress management. But there are still a lot of key areas that need to be addressed on a societal level, so this is going to be the first of many podcasts that will try to acknowledge and address some of the issues of our times. So, maybe Sagar, to kick off things, you might want to give a little background as to your understandings about the youth issues.
Yes, so as most of the viewers who would be following these podcasts would know, I have been affiliated with Symbiosis and with academics for over a decade now. And through these years, I've had a huge number of interactions with students and with the youth, in a sense. And I've come across all the classic youth issues that we are plagued with, and the fact that youth and students go through issues such as anxiety, depression. Uh, these are not really any laughing matters. I mean, some of these issues can actually become very serious, and in fact, some cases, if not treated properly, even life threatening. So, issues ranging from anxiety, depression, procrastination. There's a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion, uh, a lot of missteps before they receive right kind of counsel. And these are some of the issues that during my time, of course, with Symbiosis, I tried my best to tackle. But I found that those were informal attempts, and those were not really, they were not curated properly. So we decided to go ahead with this forum so that we can reach out to the youth and help people on a collective platform when we can have an interactive forum where it's not just one way or dealing with people individually. Of course, the primary mode of LifeSpring is where students and youth, in a sense, contact us, and we reach out and customize solutions. We work with them on a one-to-one basis. But there are certain issues that need to also be addressed publicly, and this needs to be a forum where there are important debates which take place, where people don't really fear talking about what they feel, don't really fear giving out opinions that they feel, and also seeking help. So, over the years, one of the things that stuck with me is the fact that uh, youth issues is not really a very unique scenario, or it's not something which is just a product of our times. I mean, even if you go back uh, the last 40, 50, 60 years, as long back as memory can serve, youth have always historically been, let's say, the rebel vanguards. They've always stood at the cusp of society, at the edge of society. They're the ones who are most prone to bending rules, if not outright breaking them. And they've also led to some very important movements of our times. For instance, if you look at some of the great counterculture movements of the 60s and 70s, wherein the American youth were one of the most important vanguards in opposing the Vietnam War, or you had the counterculture hippie movement of the late 60s, early 70s. You had important movements in the 90s which led to at least a sense of economic liberation in China. So the youth have always been at the forefront of change, and that's one reason is because they don't really abide by rules very well. And you can call it hot blood, young blood, whatever it is, but that has been the forte of the youth. But 2010 or thereabouts marked a unique turning point because at the same time, whether you're young, old, doesn't really matter, but at in around 2010, the whole world as a whole got introduced to social media. And social media was a platform, not just technology or the internet, but specifically social media was a platform wherein there were no rules to begin with, right? If you look at how social media and the explosion of how integral it's become to our lives today, it never carried with itself a set of rules. And as a result, the whole society, young or old, began to understand these mediums and these platforms at the same time. So unlike, let's say, youth from, let's say, earlier times, even my times, for instance, There was no older generation to explain the rules or to hand out a certain society to the young. Everybody was exploring the same universe at the exact same time. So, one of the interesting factors being that we're all equally old as far as social media is concerned, right? We've all started at the exact same time and we're just as much into the process as anyone else. So, there are no veterans, right? You could be one of the people who had chosen to keep away from social media, but if you were alive anywhere prior to 2010, social media hit you at the exact same time as it hit anyone else. Now, what this meant is, since there are no veterans to this at all and nobody has grown old with it, nobody has really seen a full cycle, there is no one to actually mentor you. And as a result, with the fact that so much of a life is now being run through social media, today, if you have a problem, short of exploring solutions, which could be completely arbitrary, there is no one at all to guide you in terms of what is right and wrong. And it's not surprising that the further we go into this journey, the problems of anxiety, depression, procrastination, some of the other issues I mentioned, something which anyone listening to this podcast can very easily identify with, are no longer remaining youth centric problems. They're actually becoming problems of everyone who's part of this journey. So today you find people in their early 20s, their late 20s, their 30s, their 40s, pretty much everyone falling prey to the same chaos. And this is not a very healthy scenario because this is not going to end well considering nobody has an exit plan, nobody has a fail safe in case things go bad. So I'll explore a little, I'll explain a little more as we go along in this podcast in terms of what I mean. But this is one of the big issues of our times that I don't think enough talk or enough discussions have actually happened about.
So, what do you mean? Can you give an example for that?
Okay, so for instance, I mentioned how problems of youth or the fact that youth have had a tendency to be on the fringes of society is not something very new. But that has also always been accompanied by the fact that while the youth have set into motion some important rebellions, they have set into motion some very important changes. Beyond a certain point, no matter which country or which part of the world we are talking about or which era we were talking about, there has been a sense of maturity. So, for instance, the same kind of arguments that you're likely to make when you're 18 used to be true. It used to be true that you would not be making those when you're 30. Now, that is one of the biggest changes which I've found has taken place since the arrival of social media. So, I'll give you an example for that. For instance, today you'll find there's if you scroll through the internet, if you scroll through Facebook, you'll have all sorts of posts which are ranging from sarcastic to dark humor to outright deprecation when it comes to, let's say, public policy. So now it doesn't have to be that you're a supporter of the current government or you're an opponent of it, but regardless of which government is in power, you'd find that there's a wholesale deluge of posts which would be criticizing public policy. Now, I'm not saying that the opposite of it is true, because even that's happening. You'll have another parallel platform, again on the same forums, which will have outright devotion which is preached. So, for instance, if you look at the way the current government is handling the COVID-19 crisis, you'll have a set of people who are going to be rejecting any initiative taken by the government, and you'll have another set of people who are going to be outright supportive of any initiative of the government. So we live in a paradoxical state of affairs. On one hand, you'll have people criticizing even the lockdown, something which is very, very essential if you're talking about stopping or halting a pandemic. And you'll have another set of people who are very, very keen on banging plates at 5 p.m. and chanting things like Corona go back. And there is no middle ground at all. There is no rational argument. So, for instance, regardless of the political party in power, each group knows that it will always have a set of people who will abide by them blindly, and it will always have a set of people who will oppose them also blindly. If you go back a few months, you'll also have very similar bipolar reactions shown to, let's say, the CA debates. And I read a video on the CA topic to explain just this, in terms of regardless of what your opinions are, whether you are pro CA or anti CA, at least understand what the hell CA is. Uh, but this is a paradox that is causing greater alienation, because you find that if you're dealing with a paradox such as this, let's say I'm on social media, and if I want to have a middle way, I want to really understand whether the government, let's say the public policy rolled out, I want to be in a position where I can make a rational viewpoint. Now I find that, let's say, public platforms, social media being the biggest one of them, uh, there is no middle ground at all. There is no way I can get information in a rational way, wherein maybe I could say that, yes, we need a lockdown. However, there are certain factors which need to be handled better. If I go onto one of these platforms as a youth, I'm either going to be faced with a barrage of, let's say, anti Modi sentiment or very, very pro Modi sentiment. There is going to be no middle ground. And which is a problem, because then I have to choose camps. So, what I also realize is if I don't choose camps, I'm going to be absolutely isolated. Even if I do choose camps, it's not like each or any of the camp actually has too much of rational. And as a result, all forms of argument break down. So, this is a problem which, even, I mean, let's say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even if youth found themselves in these situations, it was something that they didn't always have to live their lives with. Because the further along their journeys that they went, the more they understood systems, uh, the more they actually matured to the fact that there is often a middle ground, right? Even if you're in support of something, there could be certain aspects which need correction. Even if you're opposing something, there is sometimes something to learn from your opponent. That middle ground is completely absent. And what I find today is that even youth who have been through this process, been through the rebellion phase, are still rebelling even 10, 20, 10, 15, 20 years down the process. So there is no maturity. We seem to have just disqualified that aspect, and which is clearly not healthy for any society. And it's not very surprising that the society that we live in right now is plagued by the same set of problems that youth used to have and eventually mature out of. We used to be anxious when we were 18. We used to be confused. We used to be having tendencies like procrastination. But we moved out of those by the time you hit your mid 20s. We are still anxious and still depressed and still confused even in our 30s. And if we do not actually explore this solution to this together, at least first try and understand what this problem is, then we're only resigning ourselves to a lifetime of gloom. So, this is the reason why I think a debate like this or a conversation such as this needs to happen on a public platform. A lot of the things that we might discuss during these podcasts might not rub people the right way. There could be people getting offended, okay? But that's okay. If you're offended, at least means that this connects with you in some capacity. You need to be in a position where you're not forced into camps, because that leads to atomization.
By atomization, what do you mean?
So if you okay, so now let's look at again. Since I brought up social media and we talked quite a lot about it. Now here's what happens. Let's say I'm someone who's entering college, okay, and let's say we think of or imagine a scenario in the early 2000s, which is when I entered college. Now, so when I entered college, as anyone who has been through that journey would realize that entering, passing out of school and entering college is often a frightening process, because it's often that you're moving out of your city, your hometown for the first time, and a whole set of new faculty, a whole set of new friends. You're supposed to know people and they're supposed to like them. You're supposed to create your own mark. Gone are the friendly days where school teachers used to you from almost birth, right? So when you're already dealing with, and plus of course you have to make important career choices, right? Period which you're not very qualified to do. So when you're already dealing with all of these issues, what tends to happen is you'll find that people end up forming camps. The first thing that you do when you enter, let's say, first year, is that you try to find out other people who share opinions like you. And you would quickly form a community. So the most successful students, quote unquote, would be the ones who have large groups. So in a sense, it's very tribal, right? It is a form of tribalism wherein you try to form your tribe, and your self-esteem in that sense is directly proportional to the size of your tribe. If you have no tribe at all, uh, then it's going to have a negative effect on your self-esteem, because that would mean you're completely isolated, right? These kind of individuals also do exist, unfortunate but true. They end up, or they used to end up, being isolated. They used to keep to their own selves, and eventually over 3 years they would find other such isolated cases and form a small tribe of their own. Now what happens is, you go into college. Let's say we're doing the same experiment in 2010 or beyond. You enter college. Again, you're plagued by those same insecurities and doubts. You try to form a tribe, but you realize that you don't actually have to meet people and get to know them. All you need to do is, you just need to figure out what their names are, and you can search them on Facebook. So your tribe essentially gets made on Facebook. So initially, of course, you go on trying to add absolutely everyone who's your class or who's anywhere connected to you. You add their friends as well. And you have a very large tribe. So things seem to be rolling out brilliantly, because, suddenly now nobody has to be isolated, right? There are no loners anymore. Everybody has a set of friends. What one doesn't quite realize though is that the tribes which are being formed on social media are being formed in isolation. So it is not important now that you have to be physically close or in proximity to the other members of your tribe. You can access them even remotely. And the best part about this is, or at least that's what social media tells you, is that each of these individuals in the tribe that you have formed has their own virtual personalities. So those virtual personalities are what you try to connect your virtual personality with. And even though that might not really represent who you are, you don't care, because the person on the other end is also not representative of what he or she is. So you have a set of virtual personalities forming a union, forming a clique. And the only condition of this is that to abide in that tribe, or to exist or be a part of that tribe, there are certain norms that cannot be challenged. For instance, if you have a tribe with strong political bias, whether it's in favor of a political group or in against it, the condition for you to be part of that virtual tribe is that you have to have the exact same viewpoints. Now, which means that online you'll have all of these numerous tribes, and it's impossible to be a part of multiple tribes at the same time, right? Because you'll immediately get ostracized. See, understand, there are no interactions, or at least certainly not as many interactions happening in the real world as there are on the online world. So if you're not a success in the online platform, which means if you're not appreciated, you're immediately going to be thrown out, right? Online. People could still talk to you in person, but that doesn't really matter, because the main presence that you have, which occupies bulk of your day, and in this case bulk of your night as well, is an online presence. You get tossed out from there and you have nothing. So as a result, you learn, the first thing that you learn through the initial years of your college is, in a sense, not to rebel. You start abiding by a set of rules which are being predefined. And that's a great irony, because in the age that your hormones and your age, in a sense, your biological age, prompts you to rebel, it in fact invites you to be assertive, invites you to be adventurous. You are actually cloistering yourself into a very narrow tribe, into a very narrow group, which is quite toxic. So as you extend this, where people move out of college and start getting into let's say they start working, right? They start to have careers. The fact remains that even though there is a transition, even though you have actually matured out of that age, the online tribes still are the only, let's say, inclinations that you have, the only groups that you have. Since the tribes have very rigid opinions about what you can say and what you can think and what you can't, you realize that while you might not actually believe, or you might not like to accept most of what your tribe says, but to be a part of the system, you have to play that game. In a sense, you're absolutely alone. Because as you mature, as you grow biologically older, there is a sense of settlement that starts coming to you. So you will not have quite as adamant opinions about, let's say, any issues, okay, social issues, political issues, the way you have in your 20s, you're not going to have that kind of rigidity about your opinions in your 30s, right? You can call it a certain kind of mellowing with age. But the online tribes would prevent you from that kind of mellowing. So you start living a paradox. You would have an online persona which is absolutely rigid, in tune with the tribe, and you'll have a physical persona, an actual persona, which is actually mellowing. That contradiction creates great anxiety, and it's something that none of us is talking about.
But don't you think that this also has led to giving a voice to individuals, which was not the case before? For instance, since the arrival of social media, we have seen some very important movements such as citizen journalism, the hashtag #MeToo campaign, the ability to giving a voice to marginalized communities, etc. Plus, it has brought people closer than ever before.
See, it's true that we've had, like I said, I mean, this is a platform which has, of course, given a voice to a whole set of people. I mean, I never realized that, growing up, there was no way, if I was in college, let's say, or when I was in college, it was absolutely impossible for me to say something which could be heard by someone, let's say, the US, right? Unless I became an outright success, unless I was a celebrity or something. It was impossible that anything which I said or wrote somewhere could ever be read or heard by someone in the US, right? Now, today that's possible, right? You post something online and it's essentially open for the world to see. You can, in fact, even decide to what extent the world sees it, right? You can customize the settings. So it's given an unlimited platform, it's given an incredible power, and it's certainly given voices to people. The question is, Facebook or any other kind of platform, be it YouTube, Instagram, any kind of social portal, while you do have a voice which essentially can be heard by anyone in the world, the question is, you might not always know what to say. And you still have that power, right? Regardless of what kind of a comment you say or you want to make, you will always have that power. What that means is, as soon as you get onto this platform, you have to immediately adapt to the rules of the platform. You can't take your time at being cool. You have to learn the tricks and the techniques of this trade very quickly, right? So there is no maturing into the system. You have to learn it instantly. Because if you don't, you're still going to be heard by the world. And you're going to be jeered by the world if they don't like what you see. So if you look at how a decade ago, teenagers would very hesitatingly enter into conversations with the opposite sex. They would be very touchy about what they say. They would kind of learn by instinct, right? You approach someone of the opposite gender, you make a conversation, you attempt to make a conversation, you fall flat on your face. You learn from experience, file that away in your memory, and do better next time. There was a gradual sense when by the end of 3 years, you're fairly comfortable in dealing with any of the genders. Today, that maturity or that maturing phase is gone. You're not allowed to have that anymore. You have to be cool and making really witty jokes instantly as soon as you get onto one of those platforms, right? You can't really say something dumb and expect people to give you a second chance. So how do you ensure that? If I go into Facebook and I have nothing important or nothing very funny to say, and yet that's the only thing I'm allowed to say, right? I need to say something which is eye-catching. So the solution is, I forward something which has already been said, right? Which has been ratified. So it could be a video, it could be a post, it could be a message. I forward that which has already been ratified as being cool. And I make that my opinion. Now, if I forward 10 such things, think about it. I'm forwarding them without any content at all, without any comment on my side. I forward 10 such things, that becomes my opinion, right? So that does lead to atomization. And yes, we conflate this with saying that, okay, it's given a voice to people. People now have the ability to speak their mind, right? Or the ability to have their own thoughts and all of that. In fact, it's the exact opposite of it. So, for instance, if you think along the lines of some of these campaigns that you mentioned, let's say the hashtag #MeToo campaign. Now, well, of course, there's no doubt that sexual harassment at the workplace has been a long-standing issue, and it's something that had to be addressed. And let's not get into the campaign itself per se. We can address that maybe in a later talk. But if you look at the way a campaign like that works, wherein you're actually reposting or retweeting something which has been said about a campaign before, right? That's how a campaign becomes viral. It's possible that not everybody who forwarded a post which was about, let's say, the hashtag MeToo, was equally convinced about that post. It's very possible, because if you look at the scale of the campaign, if you had that many people who shared this and reposted this and retweeted that across the globe, if you had that many people convinced that all of these issues, such as which constitute sexual harassment, are not okay, you would not have the problem of sexual harassment at the workplace, right? Almost no one who wants to belong to a tribe online would ever post comments to the contrary. So, for instance, if I have to say anything at all on this campaign, I would have to repost something which has been said, which has been approved by the rest of the tribe as being cool. This is not very healthy. And it's not just about the hashtag MeToo, it's about any campaign in general. It's essentially a problem with social media, or it's essentially a problem of our times. Because this tendency to take conversations which have been ratified ahead, it's like parroting a speech, a very famous speech, and saying that same thing over and over again. That's not very helpful, because you end up becoming dogmatic. So one of the great ironies is that we are actually in a movement where social media is trying to make us as non-conservative, as liberal as possible. In doing so, we're actually becoming hyper-conservative, because this is just percolating dogma. If you keep parroting arguments, if you keep making the same argument over and over again just because it's been approved, that's dogma. That's hyper-conservatism.
So how do we address it?
So I think the first thing we need to do is, and here's a little bit of an irony, that we're going to be using social media to begin this conversation. But the first thing we need to do is we need to encourage comments, especially as far as this conversation is concerned. I would very much appreciate anyone who's listening into these podcasts. Even if you were to accept what I have to say, it's very important that you reflect on it, comment on it, and then take it ahead. It's important that you don't take it ahead as dogma. So it's very important that you do bring in your thoughts, raise more points. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to discuss a whole set of problems going ahead, and solutions as well. But to be a part of a journey such as this, it's important that we make that break and we use the power that youth have always had, the power to bring about change. We need to empower our youth truly once again, because this is essentially making us mindless zombies.
Okay, so it's been an interesting discussion, Sagar, and I think there's a lot to ponder on. We'll leave it at that till the next time. For all those tuned in, we would appreciate your thoughts on these issues. Please make sure to leave your comments and questions below. This is an important movement of our times. Kindly like and subscribe to be a part of it.
Thank you.